Welcome back to the channel. Today we're gonna redo the rear suspension on this 1964 Plymouth Fury 9-passenger station wagon. I'm actually gonna remove the entire rear end out of this, springs, the whole rear end, everything in one shot. And the reason for that, it's getting the rear end housing out of this car. This is a 64 Belvedere 2-door hardtop, slant 6, 3 on the tree. But it does have like a 410 center section in it. I'm not putting the 410 in the wagon, but I need the rear end out of this because it's a later 8 3/4 axle housing, which means it's not as wide. Now there's some really good information online about the widths of these early B-body and later B-body rear ends, and the 64 is the widest. If memory serves me correct, it's about 52, 53 inches wide, where the later ones are like an inch shorter, or not as wide. I know the rear end in my Dart is like 50 inches wide. It's one of the smallest, as far as width goes, rear ends, and that's why you can fit a giant tire. And that's the goal here. This wagon has on all four corners 225/70 14s. Now, it's bad enough trying to find a 14-inch tire, but it really doesn't help as far as gas mileage, and the availability of tires is just so slim. Plus, even if I put a big 15-inch rim on here, I'd have to get a small tire because the rear end sticks out so far, or I'd have to get a really, gigantic offset, which I have 15-inch rims. So, and I have all the parts to do this, so that's the way we're going to handle it. This also has the tapered axle in it. It's the original axle, which I don't have a problem with. I already solved that problem where you take the hubs off and you take the drum out, and then you put a 65 drum so it comes off in one piece. But I do want to be able to put a bigger rim and tire on the back. So this wagon has a 276 Sure Grip rear end in it. It's what it came with from the factory. I am keeping that for the highway because the 410s that are in that Belvedere is just ridiculous. And you may ask, why do you have this canopy strapped to the car? Well, once again, we're experiencing 20 to 40 mile an hour winds today. It's supposed to get even more windy tonight with wind gusts in the something, I don't know what. And I just can't have this thing flying away. It flew away on me once. And that's what got the rip in the top there. This thing's actually lifted up and flipped over. I'm not starting on this. I'm going to start on the Belvedere. I already did the measurements, and the wheel well on the wagon is the same as the 2-door hardtop, which was kind of surprising to me, but I guess it makes sense. This going together easy. It must have been difficult. Just had to grab that brake line in once with vice grips and it came right off. Got my plug on. I'm gonna hit up the U-joint there. Let's see how cooperative this is. I should put it in gear. Nice. There we go. Nice. Shackles next. Nice and free. That's crazy. Up here, everything's rotted. That wagon's gonna be a bear. The thing is undercoated like crazy. Let's see if these cooperate. They rarely do. That self-evacuating bushing. That's a nice feature. Go. It's almost like it wanted to come out. Wow. For the front spring perch, you can't take just the bolt out because the frame's on the other side. So you have to take the 4 bolts out of the back here, and that usually just drops the spring right out. Here we go. Drop it down and roll it out. I did disconnect the emergency brake cable. Success. So these spring mounts are not factory, but I'm gonna keep them. I think I'll use them on the wagon. At 11-inch brakes, new e-brake cables. These I believe are super stock springs. I checked the numbers. We'll be taking the springs off and putting my wagon springs on, because these are like 8-leaf on one side and 5 on the other. And I'll be putting my sure grip in the center, but everything else is going on the wagon. What I don't like are these U-bolts. Now, when I did the Dart, I bought the U-bolts that have the flat part that goes across the axle so you don't crush the tube. And when I got the springs from Espo's, they said, do you want the U-bolts? And I was like, yeah, sure, you do such a great job with the springs. And when I got the U-bolts, they're the same as those, so I'll probably just use what I have. When I looked at the wagon, I believe it has the same, just rounded, not flat. So we'll go with it. So P3690456, I believe that's super stock, and that would make sense because it's on the passenger side. And this one's 80556PN3333. And I think this is just a regular spring, or it's the other half of the super stock spring. I couldn't really find info on this number. Oh wait, here we go. P369045X. P369045 6. So P369046 has 2, 4, 6, 8 leaves. And P369045X has 2, 4, 6. So that must be the matching pair of super stock springs. This one's ready to come off. It's quite the difference just those 2 leaves make. So there they are. Espo springs and things. They press in the front bushing, and they give you the shackles if you want, and the U-bolts and all that. And when I asked about the shackles, she actually knew that the wagon had specific shackles that they're not even like normal shackles. She also knew that the wagon spring was 7 leaves. So 8, 6, 7, 5, 3, 0, 9, you know the drill. So I'm going with the Espo springs and things U-bolts for 2 reasons. One, they're longer. Probably need it for the wagon, the 7 leaves. I know this was 8 and 6, but they were kind of short. And the other thing is, these are like splayed out, and I don't have time for this. I got one started. We'll get that secure, and then we'll get the other one going. I'll torque those to the correct specs. Once I get this in, I'll probably loosen them up when I go to put this in. I will not be making my goal of today having this done. And here's the reason why. These front spring mounts don't fit over my new springs. And they wouldn't even if I bent them out, because they're already bent. I don't know how well that shows up, but they're splayed out. And that's what they did to get them on those other springs, and they're not even close on this one. And you can see the metal bushing, and I'm not messing with this bushing and the insert. So I'm gonna have to order ones that actually work. So here are front spring mounts that actually fit the spring, and they have 2 holes so you can, you know, raise or lower the car. So I'm gonna have to order those. And for this car, I also got the plates They kind of strengthen that little area there. It's kind of weird because you could buy the kit with this bracket, the plate, the spring eye bolt, and the 4 nuts, and it's like $250. But if you just buy the spring holder and the plate, it's like $100. So I just did that for this, and then I went to the hardware store, bought, you know, 8 lock nuts and 2 giant bolts. These came off that Belvedere. The ones on this car are just staying with the springs and going back in the Belvedere. So I cheated, and I took all the bolts off here, all the nuts off, while the camera was charging, and I was swearing we're gonna see if we can get this fluid out of here. The axles are still in, but I was hoping I could open this up enough to drain it. Let's pull those axles. See if we can crack this egg. Temporary 410 storage, and heave. So this is all the information on here. Richmond 82-7302-1 L 48620. And then there's this. Looks like it's handwritten. 249N BL-008. And then there's these numbers. 52068C 26354X. Like I know in the Mopar stock ones, they actually stamped the gear ratio into it. But when I spun the rear end and counted the U-joint, how many times it went around, or count how many times the wheel went around, whatever it was, I got 410s. Well, that's too much for a station wagon. I got 355s in the dark. That's plenty. Barracuda has 323s. That's perfect for what I use that car for. I don't know. Maybe we'll have to find something for this. Here we are days later in our quest to swap rear ends from this to our Fury wagon. So now we're going to get into the oddities of the pre-65 rear ends. So first things first, let's pop this hubcap off. And I have this set up the same way. 2 jack stands in front of the rear springs, but I also have these 2 bigger jack stands on the rear of the frame because this thing is significantly heavier than that 2-door. So pre-65 Mopar 8 3/4 rear ends have what's called a tapered axle, where the axle shaft comes through the hub, through the drum, and the drum is actually swedged on to the hub. It's one piece, and I'll show you what I did to address that once we pop this off. So this brake drum would originally have been attached to the hub. So here's the hub. So these studs would have come through the brake drum and actually swedged into the drum where you couldn't separate them. So in order to change the drums or even check the brakes, you had to pull the hub off. So you'd have to take this nut, loosen it, put a hub puller on it, and pop it off the axle shaft, which sometimes can make the most incredible sound you've ever heard. So what I did is I got 65 drums, got different studs, and that solves the problem. So now I can take these on and off at will. So that's the wagon specific rear shackle, where for some reason there's an extension in the frame and the outer shackle is like in an S shape. I don't know the benefits of that, but that's how it is. This car's pretty covered with undercoating. It's not very tight. That looks hand tight to me. Yeah. Well, it didn't come off on its own on the highway. It is pretty coated, and I don't know if it's undercoating or road grime or everything. Yeah, that's loose. Yeah, I think the only thing holding it on is the undercoating. So I've got the shocks unbolted, the e-brake cables undone, the brake line undone. Same as the other car, just a repeat. So there are 4 bolts here holding that front spring on, and they are buried in undercoating. So this car is in pretty good shape for the year, but it has 1,000 pounds of undercoating on it. So as everyone knows, that's a double-edged sword. I see some nice fresh metal under here, but if you get water under there and it gets trapped, forget it. And these lower bolts are so encrusted, you can't even see them. Yeah, that looks like sand. I don't see rust behind it though. There's a YouTube channel, I think it's A Minute of Dangle, where the guy dips cars. That would be nice. Of course, since once you do that, you gotta fix all the rust. Everything's out except the axle and one shackle. So I got this shackle out. It basically fell out. Done. This one refuses. It seems to be loose in the spring eye and stuck up here. And it actually, the pin broke off the shackle, so. With everything else unbolted, I think I can wiggle this spring that way and then deal with the shackle. It is out. These springs are shot, just covered with that rust proofing undercoating garbage. Look how thick that is around the spring. Well, this is what I like to see. So the front spring mount's nice and solid, not rusted. I'll chip away at as much undercoating as I can while I have this exposed. A lot of it's just crumbling, so might as well get it off, the stuff that'll just come right off. That way moisture can't get behind it. This, somebody who's a body person who's not very good at it, apparently did this work on the quarters and the fenders and the cowl. So, I don't know. What do you do? I think I'll just try to get the dirt out and, like I said, get this stuff off. Stuff that'll just come off, which seems like an awful lot. I'll probably lose like a couple 100 pounds by just hitting this with a scraper. This I don't like to see, the gas line buried by it, but if it's not leaking, I'm not going to deal with it this time around. Along with the Wagon specific shackles, that's the Wagon specific exhaust. Comes out the sides. Probably so the kiddies in the way back seat don't get the fumes. I don't know why they'd be worried about that, but not about them flying out the back window. There's no seatbelts back there. Fun fact, this Wagon had a trailer hitch that somebody torched off, but it was basically just a piece of iron bolted to the rear frame rail. And here's the trailer lights. So this is how I fixed the tank that was when it was leaking. There was a rust hole here. This is a Tanks Inc. fuel sending unit block off plate, so it has the right, I believe it's like a neoprene gasket that is resistant or just impenetrable by gas, and then each one of these bolts has an O-ring. So I'll probably clean this up and put some rust proof paint on it. There's more of that shoddy body work. I think he just put panels on the bottom here. I also noticed this pinion seal is leaking, and this is the center section I want to use because it is a 276 Sure Grip. So I'm going to share a little knowledge that I have, which is minimal, about Chrysler 8 3/4 center sections. So this center section was out of my 62 Dart. You can see there's the thrust block on the inside, and there's the actual thrust block. So that is a 8 3/4 center section open diff. Here's a 64 and up 8 3/4 open diff, and this doesn't have a thrust block, it has thrust buttons. When you look down the hole where the axle goes in, it's just a flat surface. So here is a sure grip center section, and as you can see, it literally has like a little button in there. Sometimes those fall out when you remove the axles. So there's 1,000 different ways to describe the differences between the center sections, and a lot of people equate it to the axle. So the rear end housing is different widths depending on the years, 64 being the widest. I think 62.3 is the narrowest. So here's the rub. In 64, Chrysler installed a round 1.5-inch thrust block to match the length of the thrust buttons in the sure grips. So what that means is this 62 rear end, I couldn't just take this and swap it into my 64 rear end because that had a sure grip in it. So the axles are actually too short. So a lot of times when guys are swapping from an open center to a sure grip, they have to shorten the axles. So my problem was the opposite. So that's kind of how I discovered that pre-64 there was literally a thrust block. So I saved this for my 62 and I wanted to put this in my 64 housing, and that had a sure grip. I would have axles that wouldn't reach the thrust block. I have to put in this 64 and up open diff. So I'm cleaning off this 64 rear end, and there was so much grease and undercoating on this thing. There's a tag here, and I also found like a yellow paint mark. So I'm gonna clean this off and see if I was right. See if it actually has the rear gear on it. I've seen tags before where it's just like a rectangular little tag, not a round one. So let's see what this says. Use sure grip lube. That's cool. I've never seen that before. The plan is to replace this seal, but I need a 1 1/8 impact socket to take this off, and I can't find one locally, so I'm gonna have to order one. And also the seal, I can get it at Napa. It's $64.95, or I can order it from Dr. Diff. It's $8. And from what I'm told, the one from Dr. Diff has 2 ribs on it, so it seals better, where the ones you get at the parts stores will leak after a short time. I'm gonna pop these axles out. Now, because they're tapered, they don't have there's not a retainer holding the axle in. You actually have to take off the backing plate. I don't have a slide hammer, and there's a special tool in the factory service manual, which I don't have either. From what I'm told, if you take the nut off and you put a closed end wrench on it and then put the nut back on, you can just pound it out. Here we go. Probably poor lighting, but need to get this done. So, little YouTube secret. I did the other side already, so I know exactly what tools I need and exactly what to do. Tapered axle. Remove the cotter pin. Now, I've had these hubs off already, and when I took them off the first time, I didn't have the proper tool, and it took me, I think, 8 hours. One came off within like 20 minutes, the other one took all day, and when it went, I've never heard a sound like that. Remove the axle nut, and there'll be a washer here as well. Now, in order to pull the axle out, backing plate has to come off. Onto the hub puller tool. These are hundreds of dollars, but every once in a while, one will pop up for sale cheap because somebody got rid of their tapered axles. So there's a little nipple there that goes in the hole there. Just gotta line it up and make sure all these 3 are tightened evenly, so this is parallel. Got my crowbar to keep the axles from moving, and then you just give it a whack on the end. Sometimes it'll pop off. Pull the hub off. And there's a key in it. This one stayed in the axle, so I'll leave it there. There's 5 nuts to take off the backing plate. Okay, after you mop up the gear oil, because you're a moron, remove the brake line. Because this car had all of the undercoating that they had that day, it's going to take a pretty good whack to get this backing plate off. So my understanding is on these tapered axles, they would shim behind the backing plate. So because I don't have the tool that grabs the axle and presses against the housing, and I don't have a slide hammer, and I tried this on the other side where you put the wrench on and you hit the wrench with a hammer all the way around, but it wasn't a good angle. So I just put the hub back on and gave the hub a few whacks. Yep, it's coming out. And there it is. Bearing and race pops right out. I'm not replacing the seals on this. I'm not doing anything but taking the sure grip out of it, putting an open diff in it, and sliding it under that two-door. I don't really have anything against these tapered axles. It's just that this 64 axle is the widest, and I want a bigger tire on that wagon. So now I just have to struggle through getting this center section out without breaking my back. Yummy. That gear is like right up against the housing. What's up with that? Whew. That's heavy. I'll look it over for damage and stuff like that. It looks good. What do I know though? Are those teeth worn? They seem shiny on both sides. I don't know if that's normal or not. I'm assuming that's a normal wear pattern. I have no idea how many miles are on this thing. 276. I think I was right. That's what I guessed. Or should I say what I calculated. I'm not going to focus on this right now. That's not the deal. The plan is to get that open diff into this housing and then get this rear end set up with these springs into that car. So I'm going to snap my fingers and it'll be done. I took this out to the parts store today. Guy asked me if is that my Dodge out there. I said yeah. He said what year? I said 62. He told me it was pretty. Thought that was strange. I said to him, probably not the best choice of words, but thank you. Gotta order some parts, gotta clean some parts. Before you know it, it's the next day. Here we have multiple layers of undercoating that after 50, 60 years have finally dried out. I've scraped a lot of it. So there was a layer on top of this layer, dried out undercoating filled with dirt. And I already scraped all this off the frame and it's still drying out. I mean, since I'm in here, I might as well, you know, clean some of this up. This water will get behind it and will just rust it. That's paint right there. So that's the original color. It's kind of a lighter blue than it is now. Not really a fan of blue, but I like the wagon. This side, I don't even want to scrape off on this fuel line. I don't want to deal with this fuel line. I mean, if it's rotted underneath it, I imagine it would leak through. So here's the side I haven't done. Not that the other side is done, but you can see how fragile it is. I mean, it almost looks like dirt, but that is undercoating on top of undercoating. I don't know if that's multiple years, like of going back and getting it done, or they just gob it on and then gob it on again. That is a lot of undercoating. I've never seen that much, actually. So I figure I got a day or two of this. I'm not going to try to scrape it down to bare metal, just get the loose stuff off. And as it dries out, you know, over time, scrape a little more. But this is just fully loaded with, this stuff's got to go when it's dried out like this. Holy moly. There was easily 2 inches of undercoating in that corner. The aftermath, I didn't even really do that great of a job. After scraping a bunch of undercoating, I went back and decided to torture myself some more. The fuel line was bothering me because it was covered in undercoating and I didn't know what was under it, if it was rotted or not. So I just went to key points in the fuel line. This was up against the frame and there was a whole bunch of dirt sitting on top. So I just, gradually pulled it away and got the dirt from behind it and kind of cleared off the undercoating on the bottom. So if any water got in, it would drain out. And this seems solid. Also over here, where it comes around the frame, there was a lot of dirt stuck behind the undercoating. So I just, released the line and made sure it wasn't rotted. And probably the worst place was right here, forward of the passenger side tire, where there was just dirt all up in here. The undercoating was just holding it in, so cleaned it up. There's rust on the line, but it's not rotted. So I'll just shoot this with a little paint and primer. And as I was chipping away at the undercoating, I just really wanted to see, how far is the damage that this person who did the quote-unquote body work did to this car. So from what I gather, there's a piece of steel over top. Now normally the quarter panel would come down and it would meet up with the rocker just like this. There'd be a seam, but there's a piece over this. How far it goes up, I don't think it goes too far, but it's the piece that's rusting. Then I wanted to see how this lip was on this quarter panel. And as you can see, what he did was he took pieces of iron. I mean, this isn't even sheet metal, it's very thick. So there's a piece that goes from here to here. This piece goes up and over, so it ends here. And then there's another piece that goes to here, to here, to here, and there's a small piece here. And as far as I can see, there's a lot of the original quarter lift. Those little bumps are the spot welds that would have held the quarter on to the inner fender, or inner quarter. And these are my favorite. I found a ton of these where the wire from the welder is sticking through. I think the reason why I'm seeing dirt, what appears to be dirt, under the undercoating is I think he resprayed it and didn't clean the original undercoating, or that's just how undercoating disintegrates over time, and I just haven't seen that before. And as you can see here, that inner quarter it's not terrible. It comes down pretty low. Here we are back on the driver's side where you can clearly see a piece of steel and then another piece of steel. And then there's that original quarter panel right under there. And here it's really evident. I mean, he didn't even cut off the old quarter, which I'm glad. So it looks like he just tacked a piece on the bottom here and put filler to make up that gap. How far up this is tacked in, I don't know. I think it goes all the way because this shape, it looks like a Bondo shape, this curve. There's all the original undercoating. So the rockers are good. So the reason I was out here until midnight scraping this all over again, even though I thought I was done, was this gas tank. So this had a couple holes in the bottom when I first got this car. After multiple attempts, the only thing that worked was tank sink sending unit block off because it has the correct, I believe it's neoprene gasket, and then these screws have O-rings, and that's been on there for years. So I'm just going to paint this with a rust primer and paint. This red primer is the primer that was originally on the tank because it's under the undercoating. So after inspecting the gas line all the way and the tank, I was going to take the tank out because now's the time to do it. Because the only way to get this tank out is to have the axle out of the way completely, as it is now, or at the least you have to take this side off the spring and slide it forward, and then you can slide this tank out and down. I'm a big fan of, do it while it's apart. I get it, but I'm a bigger fan of if it ain't broke. So since this takes the brunt of the tire, I'm gonna prime it, paint it. It's solid, and I know because I've looked inside it before. Prime it, paint it, and I'm gonna try to find some kind of, I don't know, mud flap or something I can attach so this tank isn't getting sprayed with everything under the sun from this tire. Okay, I'm ready for the center section. I got the gasket on. It's the thicker version. It's a Mr. Gasket. It's actually got the number on it. It's 81. This gasket only goes on one way, meaning literally, like it has to be this side down, otherwise it won't go on. I put a little of this gear oil gasket maker just to make sure. I'm going to drop in this friction modifier before I put the center section in. This stuff smells so bad you can smell it through the bag. They mail it in like a plastic bag that's doubled up, so hopefully I don't gag too much. Of course I spilled some of the smelliest substance on earth. I am finally ready to put this rear end back in the wagon. Just want to cover a couple things. One, I couldn't leave well enough alone, so I had to clean this up and paint it. Clean up the shock plates, the shackles, and all the brackets and nuts and everything. Primed them, painted them. These are the wagon specific rear shackles where the top one's much longer. Why that is, I don't know. There's actually a spacer on the edge of the frame rail to make up this extra space. Don't know why they did that. It makes it really fun when you're trying to get this in next to the gas tank. Speaking of the gas tank, that's all been cleaned up, primered, painted, at least as much as I can get to of it. It's in really good shape, for being the brunt of all the debris. So I had to learn myself on adjusting the end play on these axles. And this is what I got out of it. Driver's side axle, you put it in, and you tighten up the retainer. You make sure it's in, and you'll have end play, so this will move in and out just a little bit. Same thing on the passenger side. Put the axle in, tighten up the retainer. Problem I was having was this axle wouldn't go in all the way. Turns out you need to make sure the inner splines and the outer splines align. And the way to do that is I put the socket on the pinion, and this was tilted up, so with an extension, and then what you do is you put the axle in, and then you put a pry bar. I put the lug nuts back on. You put like a 3-foot pry bar on it, and you can actually turn this axle without turning the pinion. And then you test it, and then you keep doing that until you can slide it all the way in. So that was the problem with that. Once I got that squared away, it was onto the end play. So like I said, you put the driver's side axle in, you tighten it up, put this one in, tighten it up, and you'll have end play on the driver's side and the passenger side. So what you do is you tap this axle. I just put a piece of wood on it, hit it with a hammer. And what you're doing is you're seating the bearing race. And this is something I can never find, online or in the factory service manual. So this is the bearing race. But the problem is the bearing race is facing this way. So when you put this axle in, if this isn't in all the way, this race, but the axle is, it's riding on the edge of the race, on the edge of the bearing, and you'll wear the bearing out. And you can actually feel the axle move up and down when it's in this position. So the retainer is going to push on this, but you need to kind of help it along. And that's what the end play is doing. It's tightening up that bearing and making sure there's no play. And the thrust buttons are keeping the axles apart. So when I was tightening up this side, I would go to that side and make sure the play is being taken up, because this is the only one with the adjuster. And then I was tapping this axle to make sure it was seated all the way, make sure it's tight. Then I come back over here and repeat the process. I'll also rotate the axles while I'm doing all that, just to make sure everything's copacetic. In order to do this right, you need a dial indicator so you can measure the end play, between 0.06 and 6 and 8 thousandths. So I don't have one at the moment. So someone smarter than me told me that what you can do is, as you adjust it, just make sure you're not really tightening it. You want to do it gradually. And what I do is just put a screwdriver on the adjuster and just hit it with a hammer. So righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. So if you're doing it by feel, you want to do it where you can feel the axle move in and out, but you can't see it. And I'm at that point now. So if I, put one hand on this and one hand here and I pull in and out, I can kind of feel it move, but I can't really see it. This is good enough to go under the car now. I can come back later and check it with a dial indicator. The other thing I wanted to address was this had a leak at the pinion seal. So I ordered a seal and the race thing in case this pinion has got a groove in it from the seal. But it's been going around, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 different states. The shipper is just taking it all over the country. I don't have it yet. So I'll have to do it when it's under the car. And it's probably better off, because my understanding is to get this nut off, you can't really do it unless it's in the car. So there's weight on the axle. You don't want to use the pinion to hold this. You want to put like a pipe wrench on this. So I'll cross that bridge when I get there. Last thing I wanted to address was, this is the same as my drive shaft. So this was out of my Dart. So it's a ball and trunnion. So there's a shaft that comes through, and then there's a pin that goes across. And on the pin are needle bearings in a roller and a ball. And that moves up and back, and that's how you get the play for the drive shaft. On my wagon, this seal is ripped. So all the grease is flying out, or has flown out, and all the dirt's coming in. Hasn't failed me yet. I was going to try to clean this one up and use it, but this is kind of cracking. I don't think it would last very long. I bought another seal, but it didn't come with the rings here. So that'll be another day, another project. Now it's just on to assembly. I already had the springs on, but I took them off to paint it and all that. So we'll pop those on, and we'll pick up there. The only thing I didn't paint were these. These came from PST. They're powder coated. They actually came from PST in a Mancini Racing box, but it was the same price. So last time I ordered them from PST, they had that gold, like, anodized look. But because these are powder coated, the powder coat will probably chip off. I checked how this came apart originally, and the nut was on the inside. I think there's some debate on whether the nut goes on the outside or the inside, but I'm just going to do it the way it was originally. I left the springs loose so I can get them into position, get the front mounts in, get the shackles in. I don't remember how I got this out. I believe these rear jack stands weren't there at the time, but since then, this one has a ton of wagon pressure on it. This one's loose. So I think I'll pull this one out and try to slide it under with the jack and put this back. So I got this front spring perch in. Not bolted, but bolted. One more side, then shackles. So here's the fun part. Got to get this by the gas tank. Looky there. That was fairly easy. The problem when getting this out was these bushings were just so dry rotted and stuck that I couldn't get it out with the bushing, and you can't pull it out it hits the tank. So I put a plate of scrap metal here, like just some old hood or fender piece, so I wouldn't dig up the gas tank. And I had to slowly pry it out. This looks like it might go in pretty easily. Fingers crossed. Got the shackles hooked up, got the drive shaft hooked up, got the rear brake line hooked up, got the e-brake cables hooked up and adjusted. Just need to bleed the brakes and see if we can fit a giant tire on here. Brakes are bred. Brakes are bled. Thanks to my lovely assistant.
That's me.
This thing is really heavy.
You're so strong. Oh, sorry.
That's all the undercoat I scraped off.
That's a lot.
Is it heavier than a bag of dog food?
Well, maybe. There's a spider.
This is the 225/70R 14. And I'm going to try to fit basically a 275/60 15, which wouldn't fit prior to swapping these rear ends. Part of the problem is when whoever fixed this, did the body work and fixed this lip, they just put like pieces of metal and kind of distorted the way this quarter is supposed to be. I think the quarter is supposed to come out a little farther.
So it's that guy's fault?
It's somebody's fault. Pardon me.
Pardon.
So here it is.
Mickey Thompson.
It's an L60 15, which is equivalent to a 275/60 15, but the 275 is narrower up here where this is squared off.
That's huge. It's a big tire.
It just fits. It's the barrel is holding it up. I think with that same 275, it would fit. See how it's rounded here?
Yeah.
Where the other one is square. This has a larger offset, meaning the center of the rim is out farther, so the whole tire and rim is in farther. But if I get a 275/60, I could even go a little smaller. I shot a video of me trying to stuff this tire on and the other one with the stock rear end in it, and it wasn't even close. Not even close. Who wouldn't want a wagon with a tire like that in the back? Yeah, that's touching. We kind of knew that. The dream is over. Not running.
Yeah.
That's a big old tire.
It is a big tire.
I bought blue spray paint. I can do 4 15-inch rims that'll accept those same hubcaps. So it'll look the same, but it'll be 15-inch rims and bigger tires.
Yeah.
Or I could do like I did with the Dart, the Steely's on the back and the Krager GT's on the front. Or I could put those Krager sparklers on that I bought for this.
I mean, if you bought them for this,
I
then.
think they're too nice for what we do with this.
Yeah.
Plus those GTs in there, they already have tires on them.
I guess you're allowed to think about it.
I am allowed to think about it, but we got the bigger tire on the back. That is definitely the biggest tire ever, I think. Like I said, if I get an actual 275, it comes in here a lot.
Yeah.
But I can still get my hand up here. Right here where the inner fender comes down, it's tight. But I think that 275 would solve that. You're gonna be able to get that?
Yeah, I think everyone can see that. I think it looks stylish. Looks good.
I don't even have fluid in the rear end, so I gotta try to do that pinion seal that finally came after its vacation.
Yeah.
4 1/4 backspace with the L60 15. We're gonna try it with the 4 1/2 with the 275/60. The 275/60 is the equivalent of the L60. And as you can see, the 275 is more rounded, and the L60 is squared off. And with the different offset, this might fit better. So this seems strange to me. This is the rim with the 4 1/2 inch backspace and the 275, and it seems to be about the same, but it seems closer at the back here and up where the inner fender meets it. It seems really close. I jumped up and down on it. It didn't seem to rub, but when you're driving and the tires, you know, bulging in and out. I just measured this again. This is a 4 1/4 backspace. That is a giant Mickey Thompson. It seems to fit better, but I'm not getting any Mickey Thompsons for this thing. So now I have to figure out what to do, because those other rims with the 4 1/4 inch backspace, except the 10-inch dog dish hubcaps, which I want to use. This one with the bigger backspace seems closer than I thought it would be, but it fits. The goal is to replace the pinion seal on the rear end of this wagon. So this is where the seal rides, and that's what's leaking. This is a sleeve in case this is like grooved and just worn out. I do have this spare because I haven't taken that one off yet, but I got this just in case. I only want to do this once. Wagon is on ramps. Both front tires are blocked. Jack stands underneath. Crows are crowing. So once again, I'm no expert, but this is what I've learned. Pipe wrench, largest pipe wrench you can find, on the pinion. Come on, crow. So once again, I'm no expert, but this is what I've learned. Largest pipe wrench you can get, put it on the yoke. So when you're turning the nut, you're not turning the pinion against the gear. I marked the pinion nut, the pinion, and the yoke, as well as the impact socket. My understanding is if you turn this thing off, count the revolutions. When you put it back on, you just count the revolutions again. I did read that the torque specs on this nut is like 240 foot-pounds, and no one can ever get to that. Some say it's because of the crush sleeve or the initial torque. I don't know enough about it. Some say you can get it off with an impact, some say you can't. So this is the way I'm going because this is what I have. I would have preferred to not do this under the car, but I needed something to hold the rear end in place while I did this. So other than building like a whole contraption or stand of some kind to do this, this is what I'm left with. So hopefully this works. Otherwise, I'll probably be paying someone to do it. After 20 minutes, I think it moved. I saw the socket move anyway. This is not easy or fun. It's coming off. I almost don't believe it. I was literally just about to call it quits, trying to think of someone who could actually do this work without messing it up. Not that I'm an expert, but at least I know who to blame if I do it. 9. I've heard horror stories trying to get this nut off. Seal's about to pop out, I believe. There's the culprit. Okay, my guess is the yoke presses on the inner race and presses the bearing into the race, because the yoke wasn't wiggling around. So I'm going to clean this up and get it ready for the new gasket. I cleaned everything up. I put some sealant in between the metal of the seal, and I put some sealant in the splines just to prevent anything from coming through. And of course, because I couldn't help myself, I cleaned everything up. Put some fluid on the seal and on the yoke. A little bit of Loctite on the threads. And now we count. So that was 1, 8.5. I'm gonna finish that half, and we'll be right back after these messages. It is done. The rear end anyway. So it's in. I'm too broke right now to get some 15-inch tires on those rims. So we're gonna cruise with those for a while. Everything's all painted and pretty. Shackles, gas tank, springs, rear end. Looking good. I just took it for a ride. The brakes definitely work better, but this front suspension is making some horrific noises. And I noticed when poking around under the hood here that these front strut rods, there's a lot of play here and between the bushing. Might be hard to see, but that one's even worse. And I imagine the lower control arm bushings are shot. So it's still drivable for the moment, but it's in dire need of front suspension. So next time out on this car, we will be doing the front suspension because it is definitely a necessity. Also fix that drive shaft. Thanks for watching. No wind, partly sunny. Must be nice to have a job where you never have to be right.